Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with really a tutorial video on these friulmodel Panzer III/Panzer IV type tracks. If anyone's an avid viewer of the channel, you'll know that on many of my builds I replace the kit supplied tracks with some kind of a workable option when those tracks in question tend to be of a individual link and length nature. Needless to say, those tracks are crap, and replacing them with a set of workable track links is always something that greatly improves the look of the build. Typically, in these videos where I mention the workable tracks, I frequently get asked questions in the comment section or just in an email in my private inbox where people ask me to make a tutorial video on the assembly of these workable tracks. And unfortunately, I can't make this in a one-size-fits-all video because there are so many different options available on the market in terms of both the companies who manufacture these, to the materials that they're manufactured in, and not to mention the types of vehicles that they make these tracks for. Basically, almost every single tank kit you could think of, there's some kind of an aftermarket replacement workable track link option available. And no two tracks really assemble the same. So for this particular video here, we're going to focus specifically on the type of tracks that we have here on the table, which are from friulmodel, and they are the tracks for the Panzer III, Panzer IV family, and specifically for a Hummel that is going to be the subject matter of a whole other model showcase video that's going to be posted on this channel shortly around the time that this video gets published. Back to the set that we have here. These tracks here are specifically for an earlier pattern of Panzer III or Panzer IV, and this is identified by the hollow guide horn that we have here in the center. Depending on the type of Panzer IV that you're building, there are a few different generations of tracks out there, from the early pattern ones, which are narrower from this set here, to this version, to the later ones, which have solid guide horns, and then the very tail end ones have a different grouser pattern found here on the face. As for which one will work for your build, that really depends on the type of tank you're working on, and it might help you to do some homework on the subject to see which track set is really best for you. So these tracks here are again from friulmodel. Friuli is actually one of the OGs in the aftermarket workable track link market. I stumbled across them in a Japanese magazine once in the late 1990s, about 98, 99 or so, and they've been around literally ever since. Another company at the time was a competitor by the name of Modelkasten. Their tracks in comparison were made from injection molded plastic, while Friuli's were always made from this white metal type alloy that you see here. friulmodel have constantly been producing these tracks, as well as also researching and developing new track sets for a large number of vehicles that are out there. All of their components are offered on their website via the link listed below, and on there you will see that they offer replacement tracks for a large number of 1/35 scale military vehicles. These tracks generally retail for about the same price, depending, of course, the vehicle in question. Generally, their tracks can be had anywhere between $35 to about $50 US, give or take. You can purchase the tracks directly from them off of their catalog, which is exactly how I purchased these tracks here. Or you could find them on third-party vendors. I've seen them posted on eBay. I've seen them listed on some online catalogs. So depending on where the source is, these tracks are relatively easy to come by. Me personally, when I purchase these tracks, I generally go to the source direct and just purchase off the website. Although I will say that the shopping cart is a bit archaic compared to what we generally are used to, where, you know, you have a add to cart feature, you put your credit card information, then you're all set. The Friuli website's a bit on the older end, I shall say, where you use the shopping cart system, and then they go ahead and contact you via an email, to which then you could give them your credit card or PayPal information, and then the transaction can be completed. It sounds a bit convoluted, however, their system does work. I've purchased many track links from them through this method, and I've never had a problem with either the transaction or with the components coming in the mail. The Friuli tracks were some of the very first metal track links on the market. These days, there are several other outfits out there doing things that are similar. One comes to mind would be Master Club, where the quality is very similar to this, but the hinge is a little bit different with how they pin together. The Master Club links, they utilize little cast resin pins, which you go ahead and insert into the holes in order to achieve the hinge. On the Friuli links here, they give you a little coil of brass wire, and this is going to be used to use as pins, where you put them into the hole, you snip it, and you achieve your track pin hinge. Now this set here is completed and it's actually ready for painting. So in order to show exactly what these things look like originally, let me set this one aside, and here you can see what the parts look like when you take them out of the little white box. The links come individually sealed in these two bags that we have here. The reason why we have two bags for this one is that there are a left and right hand version of the tracks. What this entails is that on one side of the track link there is just a hole where you insert the wire, while on the opposite end it's closed off with a little bit of detailing to simulate the track pin, the washer, as well as the little cotter pin that would secure it together on the real vehicle. Okay, so dumping out some of the track links on the table, let me go ahead and bring them up closer to the camera so you get a good idea on what they look like. With the camera in focus, you can see the back portion of the track link. Note that these two links here are exquisitely molded. There's no extra flash or any other type of impurities that would be found on poor quality castings. The mud holes are molded hollow, as is the guide horns like I touched upon before. This one does have a small little bit of flash on the inside, but I'll touch upon that in a moment. On the reverse side, you can see the track face, and it has all of the appropriate details molded in. Note this one here, the center portion is hollow, which is again what would be appropriate for this pattern of link. What's really interesting about these Friuli links is that they are molded with the hinge sections already pre-drilled out. This is something that really makes them easy to pin together. However, there are occasions where sometimes the holes are slightly over-molded with a small little piece of material. And this is something I'm going to be talking about how to deal with in this video if this is something that you do encounter on your sets. One other thing I want to mention about the Friuli tracks is that they are made from a cast white metal lead-based alloy, and because of that, you have to be aware of the work environment as well as also how you handle these tracks here. A lot of people out there, they like to build their models on their dinner table or dining room tables, and if this is you, you want to bear in mind that you are going to have to clean the area off after you're done working on the tracks, or possibly have some kind of a sacrificial mat or a cardboard box that you work on top of. Either way, you want to keep that area clean, because if you use this for other activities, namely food preparation or serving. Needless to say, if you're handling these pieces with your hands here, you're going to want to keep your hands washed when you're done working with the tracks, and same can also be true for the tools that you're going to use to assemble these as well. Last but certainly not least, if you have small children around, these tracks should be kept as far away from them as humanly possible. God forbid, if they were to get one of these small pieces, they could potentially ingest one, which will cause a litany of other problems. To assemble the tracks, the set does give you a little coil of brass wire, but some hand tools are going to be required. These would include a pair of needle nose pliers. A sharp hobby knife is also going to be required, as well as a pair of some kind of snips. You could use a pair of wire cutters, but I'm going to be going a little bit overkill. I'm going to be using this large pair of aviation snips here for the job at hand. Something else that will be coming in handy will be a section here of sandpaper. This here is 150 grit. 220 grit is also something that could be used as well. To put the tracks together, you're going to need to first take two track links. On the back portions here of some of the links, you will see these two little nubs that are molded on. These are left over from the sprues that are used to pour and cast the links. The pieces themselves just pop right off with a sharp X-Acto knife, like I just did there. You want to be careful. You don't want to put too much force on the piece, because if you're really trying to put leverage on the component to pop those pieces off, you can potentially bend the small little fragile little hinge section that's found on the corner here. If this happens, you can possibly bend it back, but sometimes the piece can actually be destroyed by doing that. If you're not comfortable with using the knife, the sandpaper here can do the exact same job. Just go up and down the surfaces for a little bit, and it will make short work of those two little nubs. Once the links are deburred, you then go ahead and start the assembly. Take the two halves and you line them up to their corresponding locations. Then you make sure which side has the hole in it versus the side that's plugged up with the detailing. And then all you gotta do is take the little piece of wire and you insert it in. You push it in, and this is where the help of the needle, or I should say the needle nose plier, comes in handy. And you put a little force on until you feel the piece bottom out. Most of the time, there may be one or two small little obstacles of material in the way of the holes, and with just a little bit of force, generally, it overpowers the blockage, and then the wire can cut through. You don't want to put too much force on this, because you can actually rip out of the hinge with just, the force of the wire, but you don't want to be too gentle where you're hitting an obstacle and then you're just not putting enough force on it where the hinge wire doesn't go all the way through. If the hinge wire does not go all the way through, the hinge will be partially assembled, where if you have the track, you can actually wobble it from side to side, and that's something that's less than ideal. With the way you see it here, it's actually in the proper location. At that point there, all you gotta do is with a wire cutter of one flavor or another, you just go in and you snip the wire. That's basically it. No other sort of adhesives are necessary. Some people might be tempted to take a small little drop of thin super glue and add it to this little hole here, keeping the wire in place, but I would hazard against that. That would have the opportunity for the glue to seep inside of the hinge section, solidifying it, and then basically you negate the whole point of having a workable track link in the first place. I never really had a problem with pins working themselves loose because this, again, is a static model. You don't have to worry about the thing running. So just by keeping the pieces in with friction fit is more than enough for the job at hand. From here, you basically just rinse, wash, and repeat until you have a significant length of track. I like to basically just start and not stop. Some people like to assemble them in 5 link segments and then pin them together. But like I said before, I basically start with one and I don't conclude until I have all of the tracks required to fully equip one side. Well, if the planets align and things are going well, without a whole lot of time, you should start seeing the track just grow in front of you. One thing I want to mention is that the wire works best when it is in a completely straight line. If you have a bend in it, like I have over here, this is going to add difficulties to the pinning operation. If this happens, all you gotta do is just basically snip it off and then continue from there. And just like with all workable track links in all different scales, when you get into your groove with the assembly, within a short period of time, the tracks will start growing to significant lengths. One thing I forgot to mention before with the plier is that when you're holding the plier to push the metal rod in, you want to be aware of how far away you have the plier from the track. Why this is relevant is because when you're putting pressure on the wire, if it hits a small little obstacle of one sort or another, it will bend on you, causing that kink that I showed before. If that happens and the pin is too short, you're going to have to snip the whole thing off and try again. Otherwise, you're going to have a half pin found in your track link. In order to get an idea on the distance that I'm talking about, let me go ahead and just prep this link and get it assembled. Bit tricky to get on camera and focus, but let's see if I can pull this off. So far, I will say that on this set here, I've had hardly any problems of the pins going where they need to go, and it's been a really problem-free install. Okay, so you see how far I'm holding the plier away from the track link? If you hold it in at this distance, it's just going to bend well before the pin wants to be seated. So the closer you get, you could then just ratchet the piece into where it needs to go. Also, you see on this end here, I actually punched right through the detailing on the opposite side. If this happens, don't worry. It's actually a good thing in a way. All you gotta do is just push the pin in so it's nice and flush. And then with the snip over here, just trim the extra length. And there you go. Just continue with the assembly at that point. At this time though, you can see exactly how nice and flexible these tracks are and why they are really nice looking once they are fully painted and mounted to the tank. Once you have that sag going, you can really see how the mass of the tracks really come into its own and really helps the look of the build overall. And after about an hour or so, you should have the track band completed. As for how many links you need, well, that really depends on the model. The hardest one to get is actually the first one because you're kind of going in blind and you have to stop periodically to check on the tank to see how it fits around the suspension. Once you have the length figured out, then the next one you basically just assemble until you hit the same point that you reached on the one before. When it comes time for installing, I am going to show in this video how that's done, exactly how to set the tension, but we'll get to that in a moment. Before the tracks go into paint, the one thing that I like to do beforehand is to blunt the little metal snipped wires that emerge from the side of the track. Even if you snip the pieces as flush as possible, you'll still have a small little burr sticking out. Why this is relevant is because with the way the tracks are designed, the part with the burr is actually going to be against the side of the hull, and this can lead to issues when you're installing the track, when you're dragging it across the return rollers. It can possibly hit the side of the hull and scrape off the finish, which is something that is less than ideal. Another thing that can possibly happen is it could get hung up on some bit of detailing or something, making the installation a bit more difficult. Again, neither of which is something you really want to mess with. So in order to deal with that, I took some sandpaper. This is finer grit. This is 400 grit sandpaper. And I basically take the track and I roll it into this snail shell shape that we have here. Once it's all spooled up, I take the section with the pin sticking out of the end. I basically rub it up and down the surface a little bit. It helps smooth down and blunt off some of those jagged edges. You don't want to do it too much, just a few passes really all you're going to need. Once it's done, you can instantly feel the difference when you rub your finger across. Now, you have to keep aware of which side are the jagged edges because, like I said before, some other details are molded on the opposite side, and you don't want to accidentally sand down the wrong side. Outside of that, the tracks went together extremely easily. I did not run into any sort of issues with the hinges being clogged or the wire ripping out of the side. It was as problem-free as one can imagine. Now, I have built a few of these tracks. In the past, I've ran into situations where the thing was clogged, and if that happens, basically I just snip off the end with the X-Acto where that extra molded in detailing is. I just amputate that, revealing a hole underneath, and then with the wire I just run it through the opposite side and just pin it through the opposite side. Some occasions it actually cleans itself and I could actually push out the shorter pin and then snip off the longer pin, now securing the link in place. But there's no real need to mention that on this set here because I ran into none of those type of problems on this build. The tracks went together really, really effortlessly. One more thing that I need to do before I get these into paint is to make sure that the guide horns are all punched out. Most of them are pretty good, like you can see here, but there's like one or two, like this guy here, that has just a small amount of flash plugging it up. Luckily, no other real heavy tools are required. Only thing you gotta do is just punch it out. Here I have a small little wire brad, and hopefully this pops out on camera, but all I gotta do is just stick it into the little center of the guide horn, and the blockage just pops right out. Just do that to the ones that are affected, and you're basically good to go. And that's it. Quick little visual inspection. Should show you that the guide horns are all cleaned out and this track is ready to move on to the next level. Another thing to keep in mind is that this is a Hummel pattern vehicle, and because of that the tracks are longer compared to the ones on a standard Panzer IV, and even with the longer tracks you can see exactly how much spare links I have remaining. So in case you're assembling one of these and you botch up a few links, well, you do have plenty of extra to make up the difference. These loose links over here, I'm actually going to assemble a small little band, and those are going to be used as a spare track that's going to be fitted on the front spare track bracket of the vehicle. But that's going to be taken care of off screen. From here, these two fellas here can actually head off into paint. So here are the tracks now fully painted and weathered, and at this point here they're actually ready for installation. For the paintwork, I went with a coat of dark gray primer from Rust-Oleum. It's a spray paint. This is the same color that I touched upon in my 1/6 scale M1919 video that I posted a little while ago. Just like with that video, the weathering was accomplished in the same format via silver spray paint that was dry brushed on with a fan brush. If anyone wants to see these techniques in more depth, I recommend watching those videos where you can see me apply the paint and the weathering from start all the way to finish. Just like I stated in the other video, the Rust-Oleum paint does a really good job giving that dark oxide or a parkerized finish which would be found on the tracks. However, this color is not recommended for use on materials that are not made out of metal. If the tracks are made from injection molded plastic or a single piece vinyl, keep away from them at all costs because they can cause a chemical reaction with the plastic or the rubber that are found on both of those materials. Because these tracks are metal, however, obviously they are impervious to having any sort of effect on their finish. Another advantage painting has, besides making it look good, is that because these tracks are made out of that white metal lead alloy, by fully painting them in the way you see here, this encapsulates the material, and now you have a barrier of paint that separates the metal from any sort of surface that it makes contact with. The scratch paint that you see on here, this is an illusion done via dry brushing, and this is just silver spray paint, and it's not any sort of that lead alloy that's popping through. And it's now at that point where the tracks can be fitted to the model. Here we have the Dragon Hummel in question. Of course, this is going to be a subject matter of a model showcase video, but at this point here, the model is basically completed, and the last thing to mount on are the tracks. So here we have the tracks. You want to go ahead and make sure that the orientation is lined up appropriately, i.e. what thread pattern the tracks are at, as well as also which side protrudes outward towards the vehicle. We want to have the molding and detailing that was mentioned before facing outward, so you get to appreciate the detailing that's molded onto those sections. Once I have the track figured out, I basically just go ahead and line it up through the top return rollers first, and because of the mass of the track, it should just naturally just flow into its appropriate location. Once it hits a certain point, just need to give it a little bit of assistance. On the Nashorn or the Hummel, it's a little tricky because there's that bottom exhaust that runs along the side, and the track can't snag up on it during the install like this. Okay, once it's through and you have this type of a format, I then go ahead and mount on the sprocket. With these tracks, I like to contort them around the sprocket's timing. They should line up appropriately, which they do. And then I could go ahead and just slide the axle into place. Once you find that sweet spot on the final drive, the sprocket should just drop directly in. And once dropped in place, the next thing to add is going to be the rear idler wheel. Before I can go ahead and put the idler on, I need to first pin them together. So I just lock everything in. By the way, it's a bit trickier to do on camera than it is to do off camera, so that is something to keep in mind. Once the tracks are pinned, it's then time to go ahead and secure the wheel in place. Here we have the rear idler wheel. Now, I am going to scrape off some of the paint that's on the axle, as well as also on that hole that we have there on the back portion of the chassis. This is so the wheel can slide directly in place, and it's not inhibited by the layers of paint buildup, as well as also the varnish. So I'm just going to go ahead and scrape these off with a X-Acto. So test fitting the idler in place, I don't need to remove any sort of extra paint that's on the chassis itself, and the wheel just goes directly where it needs to go. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to temporarily pop the idler off, add a drop of super glue on the idler mount, and then remount the idler in place. Only this time I'm going to manually set the track tension, making sure that the track is where it needs to be. Once the track tension is set, you set the thing aside, you let the glues dry, and at that point there, the track is installed on this model. Once it's fully set, flip it over, and I repeat the same procedure on the opposite side. And of course, once the tracks are mounted to the model, at that point, the vehicle is complete. With the tracks fitted, you really get to appreciate just how better the vehicle looks in comparison to utilizing the stock individual Lincoln Lang track. One real cool benefit that the metal links have is that because of their mass, they tend to have natural sag in the appropriate locations, which would be found on this pattern of vehicle. This is found specifically on the top rung areas, in between the idler and the return rollers. This is something that if you were trying to mimic with individual Lincoln length is quite difficult, and in my opinion, it's really hard to do, and it doesn't really come out all that well on many of the examples I've seen. However, with using this pattern track, the sag and the natural look literally comes naturally, without any sort of coercion or work being needed to be done by the builder. Just install them as you would on the actual vehicle, set the tension accordingly, and you'll have the proper result. And with that, that wraps up this workable track link tutorial video for these 1/35th scale Friuli model Panzer III, Panzer IV pattern of metal workable tracks. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being workable track link tutorial videos like this one over here, or the other typical content, which would include model showcase videos, as well as large-scale project update videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There, I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been posted on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to check out eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again, and I'll be seeing you all again in the next one. Take care.